Once we reach the age of 50, self-care is no longer a luxury. Now it has to be a priority. Our inner health, our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health. We now have to refocus our priorities, and all that energy we were putting to other people, we now have to put back onto ourselves. Hi, I'm Patricia, and welcome to A Balanced Life. I created this channel for those of us in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s who are at this, incredible chapter of our lives. And a lot has changed for us, and a lot is out of our control. But the best is yet to come, I think. And I'm embracing this challenge and change in this phase of my life in the hopes of living a life of vitality where we're thriving, not just surviving. When we when we think about self-care, we're really thinking about our physical health, our emotional health, and our mental health. Now, we often start with our physical health because it's the most accessible. It feels, the most relatable. You can say to somebody, I've hurt my knee, and we can all relate to having hurt our knee. Or, I've got arthritis, or my hips are bothering me. We're at the age where we start to have knee replacements, hip replacements, these kinds of ailments, physical challenges, we can relate to a little bit more. When we think about, though, our emotional health and our mental health, sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult to assess. And maybe sometimes it feel a little bit more intimidating to talk about. But as we've aged and now we're in this exciting chapter of our lives, these are the areas where we need to be really focusing some special attention. If, like me, you've lived a busy life, you've had some losses, hopefully you've had love as I have, maybe you've had children, maybe you have a spouse or you have aging parents, you have friends around you, but we've all changed, and that's what happens when we age. And a lot of the expectations we have of aging can seem pretty grim. But I feel that if we've reached this point, we've won the lottery. And so, I want to do what I can and shore up my toolkit, make sure that I'm really looking after myself as best as possible to help not just meet those needs, but really find joy and fulfillment in every day. So our physical health, as I said, it is typically the most accessible. As we age, it's so important to have a movement practice. It doesn't necessarily have to be specifically exercise, but a movement practice that feels good to you. Things like balance becomes important. Are we getting our heart rate up throughout the day? Are we going for walks? Maybe you work out in a gym, maybe you're doing water aerobics, yoga, whatever it is, whatever practice that works for you. Is it something that you're able to do consistently? Balance is important, as I've said. Agility. Can we get up and down off of chairs? And do we have core strength so that we can still move with ease and with as a little discomfort as possible? Are we stretching? Stretching is so good for us as we're aging. That extension of arms that feels really good, and maybe you can even bend over and touch your toes. These kinds of things that maybe we took for granted when we were younger. It's amazing to think that they're now a challenge. And how our exercise and movement affects our physical health is profound. Research-based and scientific studies have shown, and obviously this is clearly supported by the medical community, that any kind of exercise that we can do has a profound effect on our overall physical health, but also our mental health and our emotional health. Walking outside in the middle of the day, getting a bit of fresh air, being in nature. Even if you're doing something like gardening, that is a very physical practice. Maybe you're into pickleball, you're a little bit more agile and active. What we do know that, though, is that saying is true. If you don't use it, you lose it. I'm sure we all have examples of relatives or people that we've watched or who've been close to us maybe, who have undergone some kind of physical challenge. And it's really hard to bounce back. If you've had some surgery, maybe you've just fallen, and you've got bruising, whatever that physical ailment is, it can be really challenging at our age and as we're aging to get back to that same level of active energy and ability that we had prior to whatever hurt us or affected us. I recently had some foot surgery. I fell and had a catastrophic injury to my foot. And I couldn't move off of my couch except for, my basic necessities and needs for over 4 months. It was 6 months before I could actually put my foot back on the ground again. That was difficult. That was a real challenge. And I vowed, though, when I was incapacitated and unable to move, that when I could move, I would. And, those first days when I was able to put my foot back on the ground, oh, it was an extraordinary feeling. And I've been walking ever since. Now, some days are more difficult than others. And I'm trying to work in some yoga practices now to help my foot gain some more flexibility, but also to help build up my own strength. I found when I wasn't moving, not only, were my legs not getting exercise, but my core strength wasn't. So now I don't feel as strong. I don't sit as well. My posture's not as good, right? These things have a ripple effect. And it's taken me a long time to get back to my pre-surgery, my pre-fall um, feelings of, physical accomplishment and ability. But I'm not giving up. I'm going to keep doing it because the age I am now, in 10 years and 20 years, I still want to be walking. Please, I want to still be walking if I can. I had my parents were very, very active until they hit their 80s. And then both of them suffered some really catastrophic physical challenges. And I saw them deteriorate. And, it's heartbreaking to watch. But their example of being active in their older years stays with me. And so, I plan on modeling that. Our emotional and our mental health are important too. And it's important that we focus some self care on that. So, what are you doing to keep yourself curious, to keep some mental agility? Are you doing crosswords? Are you doing puzzles? Are you researching something? Is there something you've always been curious about? I find at that this age, so some of us are still working, but for those of us who are not, you've got a lot of time in your day. Maybe now you can explore some of those things that, you thought about when you were younger, those questions you had about, I wonder why, or I wonder how. And you can explore those things. I know that some people are learning a new language. Now I'm trying to relearn French. It's not easy, but again, I think if I stick with it, obviously I'm only going to get better at it. I don't think I'll get worse. I may never become fluent in a second language, but the practice of it, the attention to it every day, and the focus on something is really good for my mental energy and my mental health. And it's also good for just keeping my brain active. The world literally is in our pockets now with our phones. And we can look up anything. We can be, as I said, curious about whatever you want, and you can find out the answers to things and maybe go down a bit of a rabbit hole. The point is, you're engaged in something, you're learning. Again, you're sparking that curiosity, and you're spending time thinking about something outside of yourself. Now, that's really important for our mental health too. Maybe you have a focused practice that you like. So, by focused practice, I mean maybe something you do with your hands. Are you an artist? Maybe you knit or crochet. Are you a woodworker? Again, we can be in the garden. Maybe you just like to bake. Maybe you like to cook. Something, though, that makes you feel good when you're doing it. You're thinking of something else other than yourself. And, you have maybe that sense of productivity and output as well. I find that that's something that for me with my spare time, I like to feel like I am achieving something or attaining something. And that's not really the purpose of being, mindful in our mental practices or our emotional practices. you know, really the practice is the practice, and the doing of the practice should be enough. But I'm a human being. I know who I am and what I like, and I do like to have an outcome of something at the end of it. So, at the end of my time doing it, which is why something maybe like crocheting or knitting would actually be good for me because I would end up with something at the end of it. The other beautiful part of this, though, is that, and this moves a bit into our emotional health, is that when we're spending time on our own and doing things, we are enjoying our alone time. I love to read. And when I get into a book, I look forward every day to the time I get to go back to the story and I almost live with those characters, especially if I'm really engaged with the plot. And typically for me, it's, a murder mystery or some kind of detective novel. I really enjoy those, and it's very much an escapism. And knowing and anticipating that time alone means that I'm enjoying my own company. And this is where it comes into our emotional health. So, being alone is not the same as being lonely. Now, if I'm lonely, it's because I'm feeling isolated. I need to connect with somebody, even if it's, a group of people at the community center, at the library, or with a group of friends. It doesn't always have to be that deep, heartfelt conversation. Just meeting a friend for a coffee or giving a call to a relative and checking up on them. I recently had an email from an aunt, and it was really sweet to hear from her. And I responded right away. First, because, I loved hearing from her and I wanted to let her know that I loved the stories she was sharing with me, but I also shared in return. And I did that for two reasons. First of all, I did it because I think she would have enjoyed it and enjoyed hearing about the updates on my life and the lives of my family. But also, it made me feel good to do it. I felt it, another thread of connection. We don't live in the same country. We hardly see each other, but boy, it was really lovely to have that email connection. And if I'm feeling alone, being able to reach out like that and connect with somebody really does alleviate those feelings of being alone, which is not the same, or feelings of being lonely, which is not the same as being alone. So being alone and enjoying your time alone is, a healthy emotional state. Do you look forward to having time to yourself in your week? Might not be able to be every day. It depends where you are in your aging journey. But for those of us who are finding ourselves with a little bit more time, our children have gone and are living their own big adventurous lives, then you've got a little bit more time in your day. And how are you filling that time? And is it in a way that is fulfilling for you, physically, mentally, but of course, emotionally as well? So, social connections are so important. We don't have to have 100 best friends. It'd be lovely to have one. But maybe there's also a social group you connect with. Do you sing in a choir? Or maybe you sing or you swim at your community center or the YMCA once a week or the senior center. Maybe there's a bus trip you go on with a group of seniors. There's a lot of activities that can happen at any given day in almost every community that we live in that offers some kind of connection. Maybe you live in the country in a more rural setting, and those kind of activities aren't readily available. Maybe the church that you attend or the community center that you like to go to, is a bit of a drive away, or maybe not even accessible for you at all. That's where online communities can really help. And that's actually one of the reasons I started this YouTube channel, was because I was looking for people who, like me, are aging and are looking for ways to make sure that we live a really fulfilling life, and maybe to share some tips and tricks and tools about aging and about meeting this time in our lives with some excitement and some joy, but also to create a sense of community. I'd love to hear from you. What are you doing to care for your emotional health or your mental health or your physical health? So, as I said, this channel is about those of us in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s who are finding this time in our life to be, having some challenging times, but at the same time, this unknown is full of possibility and potential. So, thank you so much for being here. I hope you'll like and subscribe. Share the video with somebody who you think might be interested in this conversation around self-care for those of us over 50. And we're going to keep meeting and chatting about ways to meet this next stage in our lives. Until then, please look after yourself. Do something kind for yourself. Treat yourself with some love. And I look forward to seeing you again.